Hey Fred, it is so good to see you, and uh the fact that you're on, I am going to just come back as quick as I can.
Great.
So say a little prayer for Karen and Dr. Innocentius, and we'll we'll see what happens. So
Okay.
comes
Thank
Tommy
you.
Bear.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, bye Fred.
Bye bye. Maybe nobody comes on.
Who is it?
Well, I suspect somebody will be on.
Okay. Great. I look forward to it.
In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to send a text to everybody and say Fred Lawrence and Tommy Bear are waiting. And if you want to join, welcome.
Okay. Thank you.
The other thing I'm going to do is mute myself so that there's no, it'll reduce the extraneous background stuff.
Is Karen feeling poorly?
No, this is a routine. This is a routine checkup.
Oh, great.
But you know how doctors are. It's you have to follow their schedule, not yours.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, take care. I'm muting myself and I'll send right now a um a text to everybody
Thank
saying
you.
you're already on. Okay. God bless. Bye-bye.
And you too. God bless. And Karen too. I may be the only one. Maybe nobody's gonna do. Maybe nobody's gonna come on.
You
Huh?
can't eat while you're doing
Huh?
that. You can't eat while you're doing that.
Well, I'm not doing too much because nobody's here, but it doesn't matter. I'm not hungry.
If you think you can, take one.
Okay.
There's a whole package in there. There's lots.
Thank you. I'm enjoying the saltiness.
I can get, you want me to get another?
No, this is fine. Thank you.
He hadn't heard from Susanna, so we don't know if she's doing okay or not.
This may not happen.
I see Fred.
Oh, hi, Norm. How goes it?
Good, good. Are we the only two?
So far, except for
Oh.
Tommy Bear. So how are you going? How are you doing?
Very well, very well, actually.
Great.
Yeah. I was glad I was able to get to George's vigil service.
Oh,
That
yeah,
was nice.
that was.
And the things people said about him was awesome.
Yeah, so fitting.
Yes. No, he's a very wise person.
Amazing person, really.
Yeah, that's true. He was. He was an amazing person.
He was an advocate for many people who almost, you could say, didn't deserve him.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I agree with that. He'd give you 100%, that's for sure.
Absolutely. But
Yeah, that's the way he was in
100% in
seminary
his
too.
case, 100% in his case is an awful lot.
Yep. So how are you doing? How's your health?
By and large, good.
Oh,
I'm
good.
in rude good health. This
That's
is
good.
a saying of Sebastian Moore, the Benedictine who we came to know and love, who spent some years at Marquette University as a chaplain and then came to BC for about 8 years
Ah,
until his superior said, "Time to come home," and he did finally come home. So he was a Benedictine Vagans,
woo.
but a wonderful person.
Oh, good. But probably have some difficulty with the vow of obedience, huh?
I think the Benedictines go easy on that.
Oh, do they? Oh.
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, okay. So
Uh,
you're still teaching right now?
no, I'm finished for the summer.
Oh, okay.
So I'm relieved, but I have plenty to do
No,
still.
I bet. I bet you have plenty to do.
Um, but it's
And
great
you must
not to
enjoy teaching though, because you haven't retired.
I do very much.
Yeah,
Uh, in the third year of the seminary at North American College, where George and I and Frank Daly went,
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
uh, because because remember, and we really had our share of Latin
Oh, yes.
in the junior seminary, and
Oh,
so
yeah. I spoke Latin fluently. Now I can't, but I did then.
oh, nice. Well, so anyway, the gift was that our classes at the Gregorian were in Latin, and because
Right.
we had so much Latin, I was able to understand it and also know how to wait for verbs at the end of sentences, like they
Yes.
do, like they do in German. So guys, the textbooks too are in Latin. So people who didn't know Latin very well came to me uh, and asked for help, and
Ah.
I was happy to help them. And in time, I realized when the class behind me was also coming to me that maybe my vocation was to be a teacher.
There you go.
So so um so those were the days, remember, that we had subdiaconate,
Yes.
and luckily this dawned on me before subdiaconate. I would have hated to not keep my promise if I had become a subdeacon. So in a certain sense I was free, and pretty soon after I left, by a kind of strange circumstance. My wife is from Oklahoma,
Uh-huh.
and she's Episcopalian,
Oh, I didn't know that.
and she met in line waiting to hear the psychiatrist or psychologist Rollo May, a
Oh, yeah.
wonderful Benedictine sister.
Oh,
And the Benedictine sister was in this live wire parish where two guys who eventually became bishops, Bishop Reed from Oklahoma City and then Bishop Boswell, they were in the live wire parish, Christ the King.
mhm.
And sister her friend was
Pauline.
Sister Pauline
Samanka.
Sumanka, became a really kind of a hip buddy, to
Oh,
use
wow.
to use Shakespeare's phrase. And so what happened was she told Sue that she really needed to meet Bishop Boswell when she was working with a group called Young Life, and she
Oh,
had
yeah.
transferred to Colorado Springs. So Bishop Boswell was in Puebla, and by this is the way God always does things. She was taking one of the kids who was a little bit reluctant to go to school where she was enrolled in Puebla. She told Sister Pauline that she was going there, and she said, "Oh, you have to go meet Bishop Boswell." And
Mhm.
he was a salt of the earth bishop.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's what I remember of him too.
so Sue did. And when in one of the times she met him, uh, he talked about how excited he was about going to the council. So Sue was driving with the student, or she was taking a student to Puebla, who was a little reluctant to go to college there. And on the way, um,
Home, on the way home.
on the way home back, she heard God say to her, "Do you want to go listen around the Vatican Council?" And that was weird. But
Yeah.
anyway, God wanted her to come to Rome. Sister Pauline, who was a very organized person, had permission from her superior to go too. And at the last minute, her Benedictine superior, the abbess or so, said, "Well, no, Pauline couldn't go because all the other sisters weren't going to be able to go." So
Oh my
Sue,
gosh.
so Sue came to Rome, and uh, when I had that realization that I was not going to stay in the seminary, and I was going to somehow, I was interested in studying theology. Um, so I left, and I had this really good friend named Ed Gaffney, who was a guy from the San Francisco Archdiocese.
Uh-huh.
And he was a live wire. He was hanging around the council all the time rather than going to the Greg. And and uh, and it made sense because basically the teachers just read from their texts. So if you could read Latin, you didn't have to go to the
That's
lectures.
awful. That's awful.
Well, I was lucky because since I didn't need to go to the lectures that my class was in or having to take, uh, I had gotten really interested in theology, and before I left, um, Our Lady Queen of the Angels, no, it was that middle college, St. John's College that we
Yes.
went.
Yes.
I I I stumbled across this book called Insight, 748 pages about appropriating the act of understanding,
Mm.
and it was by Lonergan.
Oh,
And I hadn't realized uh, until I was on the boat. So what they did, George might have told you this, is they sent us all to New York from all over the country. Diocese had sent two kids to Rome, and on the boat going over, there was another guy I ran into who became really one of my very best friends, an Italian guy from Allentown Diocese in Pennsylvania. He told me we struck a conversation and talked about the fact that we had been reading Insight, and he told me, well, Father Lonergan teaches at the Greg, and I hadn't known that. I think it did say it. I noticed later on the book cover, but
hmm
I never paid attention to that kind of stuff. So, so what happened was, um, I started to have a lot of questions, and I would bother the guys at my table, the older guys at my table in the refectory, asking them these questions.
hmm
Finally, this no-nonsense New Yorker said, "Look, why don't you go and just see Lonergan and ask him these questions?"
Ha, 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 ha.
And I would have never dreamt of going to do that. But finally, I guess the Holy Spirit prompted me to go ahead, and I did, and we hit it off really well together. And he really said, "Well, if you're a good student, which I was pretty much an A student, then you can attend my lectures instead of the lectures that the first year students were attending."
Oh, great.
That was a godsend,
Yes.
because the year after that year, where it was his last year at the Greg, he had to go back to Canada to have a lung removed, and so I got to hear his courses during that year. He taught the Trinity and Christology.
He was a great teacher too.
Yeah, he was a great teacher. And so um, when I did talk to him a few times, he said, "Well, if you're really interested in theology, you have to know the German context, because all the great theologians at that time, he believed, were Germans, or German speakers at any rate."
Well, it sure seemed like that.
Yeah. So when he had told me that, and so I realized I ought to, since I want to continue in theology, I better find out where to go. And there was this wonderful guy who was with the World Council of Churches named Lukas Fischer,
hmm
and and uh, and he was at the council. So I thought, well, I'll just go and ask him, where do you think I should go? And he said, well, you should go to the University of Basel, because that's where I went. And it was also where Karl Barth was, uh,
Wow.
his teacher. Unfortunately, at the very beginning of my time in Basel, Barth was recovering from a stroke. But in my second year there, he had recovered, and he started teaching. And he what he decided to do, because he had visited the council and was tremendously impressed.
Let me come back to you. I got an emergency call. Let me.
Oh, please take it. He may not return. Because it's an emergency call
Who was it for?
for Norman Supacek, who was in the year behind me in George Ferrick's year.
Yeah.
A very nice guy, a fluent Spanish speaker,
Hmm.
and says masses in Spanish and so forth, as well as ministers in Spanish. But a really nice guy.
No. No. But you don't want her up there because you have to,
Yeah.
so you have to tell her no.
No, not now. Don't come now, okay?
No, no, no. No. No.
You want your bag?
Okay, she sits there.
No.
No.
Here she comes.
No. 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 No.
That's her consolation. Clawing that.
What?
Clawing the sock drawer. Well,
I hope it's nothing awful.
me too.
That seemed like it might be.
No, nobody else is coming.
No. No. No.
She's gonna keep you busy.
Sure. No. When are you gonna talk to Anders about a title?
Soon. Maybe later today.
Anders was today. So maybe tomorrow would be better. I told him we were thinking about talking to him about it for the.
Oh, good.
That guy's never come back, huh?
Oh, did you just say something?
Not just nice. What did you ask me?
Huh?
What did you ask me?
Did you just say something?
Give what?
Did you say something on your way in here?
No.
Oh,
Not just that. I don't think I said anything.
mhm.
No, no. 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 Became really heavy. Three, 3, 9, don't do it, Fred. I quit.
I think I already answered that. You get on the lists of people.
Yeah, but
Who
they're
wanna
just
sell
getting
you
paid to
something.
do it, and you shouldn't be.
Yeah,
New notices. You can't check the emails because you're waiting for him.
that's right.
Huh?
That's right.
Hi, hi, Fred.
Hello, how are you?
Are we the only ones here?
Well, Norman was on before, but he got an emergency call.
Ah, well, I was surprised because usually our Zoom starts at 10 o'clock Pacific time and it's only 9:45 here.
Yeah, yep,
So you've been on for an hour.
yes.
Yeah,
Pardon me.
sure. So I'm just doing a few chores here. I'm emptying the dishwasher
All right, good.
so we can chat. But how is Sue doing with the long COVID? You mentioned that.
Yeah. Want to tell George? how
Hi,
you-
Sue.
I just appreciate if you pray for me because I really need it. Thank you.
Oh, good. Did you get my Mary Undoer of Knots?
Yes.
Oh, good. Maybe she'll help.
The world
Yeah.
could use a lot of her.
Yeah, there's a lot of knots going on.
Yeah, no kidding.
A lot of knots.
Does it have to do with the knots of nihilism?
Yeah. Well, this morning I was thinking of writing an article about several things, but one is about Trump continues his evangelical quest. And it's based, Fred and Sue, you may get a kick out of this, but I think Trump went to the church where Norman Vincent Peale preached. Did you know that? His family?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, Riverside Church. They were big fans of Norman Vincent Peale. And so Trump, as a kid, went along. His dad was a great fan of his. And I think Norman Vincent Peale must have preached on these three gospel segments. One is the one where somebody keeps coming to the door and knocking, knock, 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 and finally it opens. So there's that thing, knock and it shall be open. So I think Trump believes in that. He's knock, knock, knocking about the elections, and he's hoping that the door will open. And then the other scripture I think he may have heard was the one about if you have faith, you can move mountains. So I think Trump takes that very seriously, and he's trying to move the mountain of the Congress and the election results. And then the third thing that Norman Vincent Peale probably did was, that thing of where somebody is being fired, some bookkeeper or something for the master is being fired, and the master goes and gets the debtors and says, okay, change 100 such and such to 50, mark down what you owe. And that's what he did before he got fired. So that's Trump giving pardons to his cronies. So
He's a very
so that's,
biblical person.
yeah, he is. He's very biblical, but he's very choosy. I think he left out the Beatitudes and Zechariah and a bunch of other things, but he didn't forget those things, and he's still doing them. So that's my sense of Trump as an evangelical. Also,
What I read today was a person who was quoting George Orwell from that book of his,
yeah, it's that 1984 or
1984. Yeah.
something like that, whatever it
And
is.
in that book, Orwell calls what defines a fascist as a bully.
Well,
So
that's for sure.
I don't
Yeah.
know whether, I don't think he got that from the gospel very much.
No,
But that
no,
might be his interpretation of the power of positive thinking.
yeah. Anyway. Yeah, one of the things I've already thanked you for it in the past, but since you're here alone, I want to thank you again for do you recall my little story about when I wrote to you when I found out I was selected to go to Rome, and I don't know why I was selected at all, but
Sure. It's
and you
indelibly on my memory.
so what's in your memory?
I wouldn't have remembered it if you didn't tell me again.
So what's the story? Tell me what you remember of it.
That you wrote me when you found out you were being sent to Rome, and you said, what should I bring? And I said a copy of the New Testament.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you told me in preparation to read it too. At least that's the message I got. So I bought it. I'll show you the. Hey, I'll show you the copy of it. I still have it. Now, can you see this?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
That's the one I hoped you would get.
yeah, that's the one I think you may have told me. I got it. It had just come out, I think. And it was done by some British biblical scholars, I think. A
Yes.
New English translation, very ecumenical. The Baptist Union, Church of England, Scotland, Congregational Union, Council of Churches for Wales, the London Yearly Meeting of Society of Friends, Methodist Church, Presbyterian Church, and Council of Christian Churches in Ireland, British and Foreign Bible Society, National Bible Society of Scotland. And this came out in, 1961, it says here. No, this was 1962, the fourth printing of it. Yeah.
Ah,
So I got this,
Oh, wow.
it was a paperback, and it was becoming frayed. So I took it to a bookbinder in Pasadena and got it bound.
ah,
So I still have it with all my notes and everything like that. And
oh, nice.
yeah,
You still use it then?
yeah, yeah.
Great.
But a lot of it's been etched in my psyche from those 4 years. From reading it, I would go up. You know how up above the rooms at NAC there was you could walk up there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I would do that. I'd go up and I'd read a parable, a sermon, or a miracle, or a little segment of the scriptures, and just kind of just take a few paragraphs or a story, whatever, and that's it, and just kind of mull it over. So I think I was doing kind of my own version of Lectio Divina without knowing it.
Yeah, it was, surely.
Yeah, it was. And that was based on Rene Lateral saying the scripture speaks to you today. That's
That
what
was
stood out.
wonderful that
Yeah.
you picked that up from him.
Yeah.
Was he speaking in Latin?
Yep. I'm sure he was. Nobody spoke in English there that I
Yeah.
know of. Yeah.
No.
Yep. But I got the point. Yeah. So that struck me. So it was with that spirit that I would pick up my New Testament. So in essence, that was a 4-year course I was taking.
Probably the most valuable course you took.
It was. And then Sue, her influence, Sue, I don't know if she's ever, but when she came over and in some chat with her about how she came to the Rome and the Vatican Council, she said, well, the Lord called me or gave me a message or whatever. So that was my first instance of somebody speaking that way.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, so she's right next to Rene Lateral to adding the personal element to the scriptures.
Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah. And so that was the beginning of my inner formation.
What did you make of that thing you sent about Henry Nouwen?
I didn't read the whole thing carefully. I have to go back, but I kind of did the Evelyn. Remember that speed reading?
Yeah.
Evelyn Underwood or whatever her name was. Yeah. So I still have my notes from that. So I kind of read the beginning of it, and then I started zipping through it, and picking out different things. I saw references to Cardinal Alfrink,
Oh,
and the whole thing of mental health, the Dutch church,
yeah.
apparently the mental health thing, and that fit in with this Anton Boyson book. He was a Presbyterian minister who went crazy and went to a hospital a couple times, and then he wrote this book on religion and mental health, and kind of became kind of the forerunner in the pastoral theology field.
Oh,
So I saw that reference, and that's where they got the expression in the title. But I was a big fan of Henry Nouwen from his thing, The Wounded Healer. And he wrote another article called Generations Without Fathers.
Oh,
Yeah. Whoops,
I didn't know that.
yeah, I have to take a break now. My wife is calling me. Okay.
So, see you then.
Who was that?
George Ferrick.
That was George who said I talked about the Lord.
Yeah.
Well, I just said what happened. The Lord told me to come.
Yeah.
Did I want to come?
So Fred, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I've got to do a couple things. My grandson's coming over to pick up a few items. He has some folding beds. He's going to go to visit some friends of his. So I'm going to absent myself. How's that for about 10 minutes?
That's fine.
Okay, then I'll join you again.
I have my book here.
Okay. Yeah. And did you read that article, by the way?
Norman was here
Okay.
and he had
But
an
I think
emergency call.
But I think some more people will be joining because I didn't know that this thing started at 9. But so I think some people will be joining here at 10.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, I'll be back.
See you then.
Right.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Let's see how I can leave here. Let me see. Leave. I'll leave for now.
Okay. Good. Hey, Bob.
Hey, Fred. It looks like you and the teddy bear and Silence.
Yes, that's true. But Norman was on earlier.
Ah, you've been on since early, I understand.
And he had an emergency call and never returned. Hi,
And
Johnny.
there's Johnny. Hi, John.
And George Ferrick was on.
And George was on too. Ha ha.
Yeah. And he had to help his nephews or grandchildren
Right.
uh,
And
gather some stuff for camping or something.
yeah,
That's
so I
the story with Tommy Bear.
and
Well,
that's
Tommy Bear, sure enough.
and that's
You
Tommy Bear.
recognized him.
It's the first time I've seen him. Hello, Tommy Bear. How good is that? How good is that? So it's with you two guys there, it sounds like you've really solved all the problems that are out there. So what else is new?
Well, we haven't exactly done that.
You haven't
But
exactly.
George was telling me a really wonderful thing about when he was chosen to come to Rome from California. He wrote me at the seminary and asked what should he bring with what should he bring with him.
Uh-huh.
And I told him, well, bring a copy of the New Testament.
Uh-huh.
And so he got his copy, which he still has and uses. It was the New English Bible version.
Oh yes, yes.
And so he's a very faithful reader of the New Testament. And he really takes Lectio Divina seriously, in the most with the most serious Lectio Divina one could take. Hello, Bob.
Hi, Bob.
Tom has changed his look there.
What he has.
That's
Tommy
right,
Bear, we called him.
but the bear is named Tommy, so fear not.
To Tommy Bear. Fred, with regard to, well, maybe we check in with Bob and just see what bon mot he has as coming on board. People have been around for the last hour or even more. I learned earlier today, Bob, and that's because there's a lot of mobility in the group this morning, including Thomas, who's out on a mercy mission. But he says he thinks he'll be back. And so
Yeah.
I understand Fred has been here for over an hour, mostly meditating
But we had Norman on
and you had how long was Norman with you?
probably for about a half hour.
How is he doing?
He got why do you ask?
Well, because he reported that he was ill
Oh.
and unable to participate in the celebration of George's funeral
Oh, I see. Uh-huh.
earlier in the week. If I got my facts straight, he was disappointed
Probably
with that.
so.
He had this flu bug and or nasty cold.
Hi, Frank.
Hi, Frank.
Hi.
So Frank's probably going to discover too that some people have been on for over an hour already.
Oh, why did that occasion? Tim also has an appointment though, so he started something at 9 o'clock Eastern time. Or I guess it's 9 o'clock Western time, but it's 10 to noon for you guys, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, apparently, Thomas, our facilitator, was involved in a medical appointment for
Aaron.
his friend who stays with him, and
Right.
so he just turned
Okay.
turned things on, put the bear in charge. I guess he knows something the rest of us don't know.
put the bear in
Great.
charge and just said, you guys take care of yourselves today. I'm putting it crudely, but he was much nicer than that. And so it's in case anyone wanted to start early.
But the bear is a tremendous listener.
Ah. And boy, that is a lost
Anyone know
art.
how to turn up? I can't hear you as well as I usually can, and I can't find out how to turn up the volume.
What
I'm sorry,
what are you using, Frank? What your
my
computer?
regular computer.
What make is it?
It's a Hewlett Packard.
It's an HP. I don't know where the volume controls are on an HP.
Yeah, I don't either.
If you pull your mouse down to the bottom of, I don't know about yours, but that's where there's a little caret that
I
points up.
just lost the vision, so
And you lost vision too. Oh my goodness.
yeah.
No, what do you
Well,
mean?
wait, I'll try and get it back. Wait a second.
Yeah,
Mhm.
we can see you okay.
There
so-
I am. I'm back now.
Yeah.
Great.
What do I do with the mouse, Bob?
Pull the mouse down to the bottom of your screen
Yeah,
and see if there's a banner that goes across down at the bottom with all kinds of things you can click on. It can be on the bottom, it can be on the left, it can be on the right of your
yeah, it's not
computer.
here. I can't see it anywhere. So, oh, maybe, yeah.
Down at the bottom.
Yeah, no, that's not it, but anyway.
So there's a little caret. That's where if you click that, you might see a number of options that'll come up for you there, including the sound, the
Yeah.
power of, greater, lesser vocal hearing.
Oh, okay. No. All right, I'll just soldier on. I can hear you. That maybe it's a message for me not to talk so much.
Oh,
I
no,
don't
no, we'd miss you.
We would.
We would miss you. And before I lose it, which I want to do, Fred, you were saying how George does Lexio
Oh, yeah.
using his New Testament, New English Bible. And I'm one of those really fortunate, blessed people, lucky people I participate once a week, have been doing this for many years in a group Lexio called Colasio. And it's at an urban Benedictine monastery of the Camaldoli Benedictines
Wow.
that they have here in Berkeley. And even during the pandemic, they made the switch from gathering together at the monastery. Regularly, there's somewhere between a dozen and 20 people.
Wow.
And we made the switch to Zoom. And so every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock, we have Colasio, and it's facilitated by one of the monks in residence. And it's really just a lovely, and it's typically on the scriptures of the next Sunday. And so that it is just a marvelous experience. And
So the Sunday the day after, or the Sunday the following week?
following the following Sunday, it's the coming Sunday. Yes,
The next day.
it's
What's the number there to try that sometime?
Say again.
What's the email? How would you become part of that if I wanted to sit in on one?
I'll be happy to send it. I'll be happy to send it.
Okay.
And all you would it's controlled like this is. All you would need to do is just say the coordinator. I'll take a step back. The coordinator of the program, the prior, the abbot of the monastery, Bede Healy, kind of controls the comings and going of people, so we don't have any external interference and stuff. But all you need to do is just mention you're part of the Friday. He knows about the Friday morning group because he also happens to be my guru, my spiritual director, co-journeyer, guide, fellow I meet with monthly. And and all you need to do is just mention either my name, and in which case you'll never get on. No, I'm kidding. And that you're part of the Friday morning group and you're interested in participating. And
Okay.
you don't need to do absolutely any preparation or anything, because we really get into it in a way. And the group who've been participating have been doing it for years and years. And it's sort of the, and the antithesis of a scholarly gathering, although if that's welcome as well. I mean, it's like the classic Lectio Divina in terms of what's there and the emotional response.
Everybody.
Hey,
Enough said. Hi, Ned. There's the man of the hour.
Hi, Bob. Is this us?
How are you?
Fine, thank you. Tired.
Besides exhausted.
Yeah, it was.
I just wanted to say that George Ferrick and Norman were on, and Norman had a emergency call and had to leave after about a half hour.
Oh,
And then George Ferrick had to help his grandchildren get some equipment for a sleepover or something.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, Fred, you might want to fill us in, fill Ned in, the fact that you're really warmed up today. You've been tuning up for over the last hour here.
True.
Yeah, I just noticed that Tom had sent a message saying Fred's already on. That was about an hour ago. I thought,
I'm noted for my obedience. Or
Oh my gosh. So Tim's not here.
Tim can't be, I think.
Okay.
Tim, his wife has an appointment, and he had to take her out for that, and I think he expects her to in the second hour.
Okay, I get it. I'm sorry. I'm blanking somewhat. He mentioned that he would be here yesterday, and I guess something came up. I'm sorry to be so late.
Well, some were so early that they more than made up.
Okay. This was an amazing spirit-filled experience. So many things had to be done at the last minute. Betty was magnificent. She had her family and others helping her, but she was the control center, and she didn't ask for this, but everybody instinctively just called her and suggested or asked that other things be done or things be not done, and she would okay or not okay. And in the end, the whole movement from the morning all the way through to the reception at the Quiet Cannon was really something very moving, slow when it needed to be slow, reverent, funny when it needed to be funny. One of the eulogists, our student when we were at Salesian High School, Alberto Alvarado, kept everybody just laughing. He was like a stand-up comic, remembering things that George had done and how he spoke when he was at Salesian. Hey, ese, ¿cómo estás, ese? Just using slang. And he said that George learned how to swear like a sailor there at Salesian. And with the bishop's pardon, he looked over at the bishop. He let fly a few of those. Everybody was just in stitches. It was amazing. He was the first guy. I thought to myself, wow. And at the same time, he gave the congregation a sense of how George had related to the students in such a way that, believe me, it was just amazing. They kept coming over and and introducing themselves to me. And, this is 40 years later, and I couldn't recognize some of them. And they tell me their name and give me this big hug and, go on and on about their recollections. And I didn't really eat much when we got to because that just kept happening every minute, really. There were so many of them there. George was a hero to them. He really was. And then I came on and I just looked around and said, given what Alberto has said here, I'm just going to say what he said and then leave. And everybody laughed.
Yeah.
And then I gave my eulogy reflection, and then Bob Kerr is a very, very precise, exacting, brilliant lawyer. He acts like an engineer. Everything is structured and just right, and sequences are honored, and all that stuff. It was a little bit too lawyerish, but it came through that George, worked with this man and kept up with him and more.
And that George could be both and, right?
Absolutely. He was just, I was reminded, an absolutely excellent lawyer in those levels that were kind of, silk stocking lawyering, and then the mass came, to a conclusion. The bishop gave a wonderful homily. I'm just, I don't know, really hurting that you guys weren't able to connect. And I know, Bob, you expressed it quite eloquently. I thought, damn it, what's going on here? So I guess those are general.
I was getting schizophrenia.
Yeah.
Different overlaps.
Did they record it?
No.
No.
No. Can you imagine? What happened? George Welbers. Tom sent a message to the pastor, Father Odell, or Odell is his first name, and was very hard, I thought. I mean, he showed the disappointment and the depth of the pain that he had caused us, or at least that the system had caused us. And Father Odell said he'd done an investigation and found out exactly what happened. There was a miscommunication, he said. The man that was responsible for projecting or streaming the whole thing and recording it thought that, hi, George.
Hi there. Hi, all.
This.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Even though you're.
Don't drive too fast.
Yeah. Be careful.
No, I'm just parked here. Yeah.
Father Rodell said that the guy responsible for the streaming and the recording had misunderstood that the mass was in the morning and thought that it was sometime in the late afternoon and didn't show up until late afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly, and he said, I'm so sorry. I don't know how to say I'm sorry adequately. We own it. It'll never happen again, et cetera, et cetera.
And was it the same, Ned? Was it the same gentleman who had done the technical from the night before?
Yes.
Because the disappointment was so deep because it was so beautifully done. I was so impressed with how the technicals of it, having participated in a number of live Zoom masses from supposedly really good locations of churches during the pandemic. I was impressed with how well done and how lovely this church was. It was just the zooming and I mean it was, so I was completely set up and rearing to go, and it's like, oh no. And then the fact that there isn't even a video, but we have our George, our living human instruments right here, who were there. So I would certainly like, I don't know about the rest of you guys, but I would certainly like to hear more, like I'm hearing from you, Ned, your impressions of the actual funeral liturgy, the way you're doing it. So if you'd like to talk a little more. And I know I don't think Norm was there because he said he was ill that day. And
I was.
Right. We really missed you, Norm.
Oh, I really felt sick too.
Yeah, I'm sorry. You know, actually, nobody other than myself was there, and none of you could access it. So, Gary, I don't know
down the
where,
aisle though.
I'm
Oh,
sorry.
wasn't Tom there?
Tom, of course, was there.
Okay.
And Gary was there. Gary, myself, I thought Paul Dotson might be there. No, he wasn't. Father Sandoval was there, and was just very gracious and welcoming, and seemed to really know what we talked about. Maybe he and George talked about it later, but I don't know why there's two of me on this thing, but
That's Norm's.
You're stepping on Norm. You're stepping on Norm. You're trying to
yeah.
invade his space.
Now you are, Bob.
As you know.
It's whoever the speaker is.
Wow. I since there's only me, I'll do my best. I wish Gary was here. Gary was very impressed and taken by it. Called it magical.
Bravo.
That's
Ed Howard thought you and the bishop and John and Susan were especially good. So I'd be curious what your take is on son and daughter, John and Susan.
Johnny, were you there?
No.
Okay.
I'm the only one that was there that is present here now. I was hoping that Gary would be here, but he's not, and Tom's not. Tom will come. He'll give you his thoughts. It just can't be, I don't think, captured in words, but things were frequently about to go off the rail, and somebody would catch it and write it, and it looked as though everything that had been planned meticulously went according to plan. For instance, the beginning of the ceremony was to start with Betty and me in the choir loft singing Pescador de Hombres. But we had practiced the evening before, and the accompanist, is that what you call him? The piano player, who was amazingly good, but was a little tone deaf to us, to Betty and me. We walked up into the choir loft, and there were these 3 microphones, little tiny ones that looked like a toothbrush, and they were way high, way up. And so I climbed on top of a pew and tried to get closer to it or bring it down. He said, no, no, leave it alone, leave it alone. It's very sensitive and it'll catch everything. And there were people in the church. This was after the rosary. And so he began to play, and Betty and I began to sing. She did a wonderful, wonderful harmony. And when it was all over, we went down, and several groups of people said, we could certainly hear the piano. It was so loud, but we couldn't hear you guys. And so the next morning, I waited for him. I kind of was going to ambush him and say, listen, we can't do that up there. And I was talking without having any kind of okay by Betty. But she and I were both convinced that this guy was going to drown anything that we could produce. So I told him that we weren't going to sing from up there. They had a beautiful setup in the middle of the right of the church with microphones and cantors and all that stuff. So I said, we'll sing from here. And ultimately it all worked out. It really was beautiful. You know, as I said, Betty, she's got a wonderful voice. It's a little tiny bit operatic or operatic. And it was perfect, just really perfect. Then we walked down to the back, and the pall was placed on the casket. 8 pallbearers were there. John and Susan were pallbearers, George's brother and son and daughter. And casket was brought forward. Ceremony continued. The music was wonderful. We had thought cantors were not the usual cantors and were not going to be so good, but they were wonderful. The bishop's homily was just super on the Good Shepherd. As of the readings, I trust. And first major reading was from Isaiah, second from Revelation, and the gospel was the Good Shepherd. And the bishop did a wonderful job.
Well,
A thought or question, comment?
well, that's a great selection, the Good Shepherd.
Oh, it was perfect. It was, and the bishop did that. We had suggested, he did everything that we had suggested with the exception of the gospel. And since he finally decided that he would do the homily, he picked the gospel. And as I said, did a wonderful job.
And that's interesting because when I visited George a couple of weeks before he died, before the mass,
Yeah.
I asked George, I said, George, what are your 2 favorite parts of the New Testament? And then I'll share mine. And the ones I shared were the Good Shepherd and the prodigal son, or the loving father.
Yeah.
George had the Good Samaritan was one of the ones that he picked.
Yeah.
As well as the first chapter of John's Gospel.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's a great theme, the Good Shepherd. It'd be great to, I don't know if he had his homily written out or, we had a friend who died in October, and my wife she was my wife's best friend. She went back to Cape Cod where the service was, and her daughter put up a website in her honor and posted different, eulogies that people gave and such and such. I don't know if that's possible to do for George.
Well,
but that would be one way of, yeah.
Yeah, Darlene asked me to do that. She said, hey, Alberto was great she's of course very biased and said I was too, that the remarks that were made at the vigil by John and Susan were excellent. John really surprised all of us. He was quoting Marcus Aurelius and Bobby Kennedy, and I mean, he was, and they were just very apropos, the things that he was saying. Hi, Tom.
Hello, Ned. Hello, everybody.
Welcome back.
Hello,
Tom.
Thank you.
Thank you for the setup for us.
You did a great job setting us up. Thank you.
Works good.
Yeah, help me out here. I'm the only one, but now that you're here, there's two of us who were at the ceremony, the mass. And, you know, we went through a little bit of talking about how disappointed we are that we have nothing. I explained to them that you...
Well, we have the vigil.
Yeah, and it was excellent. I explained that you had sent a message to Father Rodell that was quite firm, I thought, very firm, and making it very clear how deeply disappointed we were.
And he was very gracious.
Yeah, you go ahead.
And he replied, well, I sent it to you all. He replied within less than 2 hours, a little more than an hour, I think.
I'm thinking, Thomas, you might want to have your breakfast. You've been going like crazy, and Ned can keep filling us in, and
Well,
we don't want you to pass out on us as from lack of blood sugar.
That's okay.
Has everybody? Does it
I second that. So Ned, I'm sorry for having barged in there with the Good Shepherd thing, but maybe you could continue.
No.
You were talking about the sermon and the Good Shepherd.
Yeah,
You're
George,
doing a great job. Yeah.
Now, why? Because I don't know what came before, so why don't you just continue and I'll chime in as I'm accustomed to do.
I really, aside from the spirit that was there, which I just was floating in, it was just beautiful. I mentioned that a whole bunch of things nearly went off the rails. The singing looked like it was going to be a bust, and it turned out to be wonderful. Betty and I had to move from one place to another. We had a little bit of a to do with the piano player, but when he finally did what he did, it was magnificent, I thought. You know, the lead up to Pescador de Hombres, and then right during the song or the hymn, sing, Señor, me has malos ojos, sonriendo, has dicho mi nombre. He did some, you know, it was just so fun.
You have a good voice.
Well, thank you.
Has always had a good voice.
Yeah.
So
maybe in our future meetings, you could sing the prayer, opening or closing.
sing the
What a
prayer.
good idea.
Closing probably, because you're usually not the first one here.
Yeah.
Cuckoo Paloma. That's what I want to hear.
They had a mariachi at the reception that was exceptional. It was fantastic, and I couldn't help it. Just they began to sing a song about la vida no vale nada la vida. Empieza siempre llorando y así llorando se acaba. Por eso en este mundo la vida no vale nada. I mean, that's just an old revolutionary.
Yes.
I don't know how many of you guys heard what it says. Life is worthless is how it starts, and then it repeats it in a different way. It begins. Life begins crying, and it ends crying. It just is not worth anything. and right in the middle of that, I just went. You know, I did that in my first date with my wife, and she thought I was nuts. But it was just, I don't know, wonderful. The spirit was there, absolutely. The homily was wonderful. The comments that were made were wonderful. And Darlene asked me if I thought we could get copies of Susan's and John's comments, reflections, and I'm sure we can. And we can certainly get Alberto's, and I've got mine. I was a little late because I was trying to fix them. Tim asked me to put it in order because he wanted to hear it.
Right. Ned, point of order. A question related to process. I had never seen or participated in a vigil rosary service where speakers were part of the rosary itself.
Yeah.
Have any others? Is that kind of a development? Was this a first? And it was quite fascinating to me and felt so appropriate.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was too. And what was, impressive was he didn't try to go ahead with naming mysteries. It was essentially the speaker himself or herself who provided the mystery for reflection. What I've done with rosary, vigils that incorporate a rosary, is to propose 5 different scripture readings in place of the traditional mysteries. And that has usually worked fairly well.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a result of the bishop. He and Betty really wanted John and Susan to express their sense of things and to honor their dad. And so the bishop said, he's the one that set it up. Initially, John and Susan were given the task of generally structuring the vigil. And they decided on only 2 decades of the rosary. And Bishop heard about that and called a meeting. And we sat there and he said, how about this? How about the full 5 decades of the rosary? But let's have reflections. So he set that up and it worked really well, I thought.
Was that unusual for anyone else besides me? Maybe.
Oh, yes. I'd never.
Yes, here the vigil has replaced the rosary. In other words, we used to do the rosary, but now we don't. We just do the vigil.
And Frank, is the vigil the variant or maybe the Vatican II sort of recommended vigil for?
It's in the normal ritual book for funerals and etc. There's a section on the vigil itself.
Whole protocol.
I completely disagree with the idea that the vigil has replaced the rosary, largely because that doesn't sit well with most people. Most people seem to be expecting a rosary.
That's the practice.
Let's put it this way. For those who still want a vigil, they always call it the rosary. Most people don't do anything the night before, but have it actually, just the funeral mass. But
or have it before. There was one.
Well,
yeah.
we don't have it in the church for the most part. The vigil is done in the funeral home at the wake the night before. And for some reason, I don't know why, but I don't know who made the decision or if a decision was made, but in fact, the rosary is no longer said either in the church or in the funeral home. The vigil is done.
So it's not optional. It's not optional then, Frank.
Well, I mean, if someone asks for if someone asked for it, of course you could do it,
Oh,
but
okay.
it's not the standard.
Right.
Actually, in the Catholic funeral right now, almost everything is optional.
Yeah.
You know, you,
which is good
which may be
because there
good.
were two while there were too many references to sin and sinner for my liking and the old ritual. It's like 5 or 6 times it would come up, and the last time would be when they're actually doing a burial. And to me, it was just a downer.
Yeah.
So I'm glad it's optional. Yeah.
Well, yeah, but it's not. What would I say? The references in the old ritual to sin and the sinner, that's not that much a part of the new ritual. But the new ritual you need to see as kind of modules.
Right.
Depending on the rubrics, the instructions are very, very clear that nearly everything can be modified in accord with whatever the local customs of the people.
Right.
And
Frank,
what's also very clear is that the distinctive high point of the entire series of rituals is the final commendation and farewell, what usually takes place after the Mass. And if there's eulogies like there were, the directives are to put them in between the prayer after communion and the beginning of the final commendation and farewell. Now, the final commendation is usually done not that well, simply because so often between the old liturgy and the new liturgy, it just is an old set of yada, 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 yada gets replaced with a new set of yada, 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 yada.
Yeah. Yada, yada.
And that happened
Especially yada.
a little disappointingly at the at the cemetery, when, according to the ritual, the very first thing that is done is that you bless the grave. Even if it's in so-called consecrated ground, bless the grave. And after the prayer of blessing of the grave, you sprinkle the grave itself, not the casket, the grave itself with the holy water. And I will usually make a commentary on that. And then following the blessing of the grave, we have a scripture and prayer. And then following that, we have the rite of committal, which ideally is you place the body into the ground and then say the final prayer of committal, which of course makes sense, but the convenience of the pardon me here, the convenience of the damn mortuaries and their liabilities, because they don't want people throwing themselves in the grave, that they discourage. Now, in the past, they would never allow, here in Los Angeles, never allow the family to be there for the lowering of the casket, because they just do that according to the schedule of the cemetery workers. Just leave the casket on top of the grave, and everybody goes off, and the cemetery workers come and do their thing after they finish the previous one and before they get to the next one. But at least here with George, they did allow the family to, those present who wanted to witness the grave, but it had to, the burial, but it had to be like, what was it, about 50 feet away?
Yeah.
Behind a
fence of sorts.
Behind a little chain barrier. You had to be behind that. Now, one person talked to the cemetery workers, and I guess, I don't know if he bribed them or not, but they told him you're not supposed to do this. As I understand it, Ned, you're not supposed to do this, but we won't object if you kind of sneak in and throw a shovel full of dirt on the. Which,
our families.
Which I did get a picture of, by the way.
Oh, did you? Oh,
yeah.
I'd love to get a hold of that. They did put us behind this barrier that Tom is talking about, and we waited and waited and waited. And so I walked over and said, "Hey, how is this done? You've taken down the canopy. The chairs are gone. Everything's taken away." Usually, in my experience, there's a mound of dirt fairly close to the where the casket's going in, the hole. And as Tom just told us or described, there are prayers, and then the coffin is lowered, and as the coffin is being lowered, it can be done in various ways, but people can then start throwing dirt with their hands, or I've seen people given little shovels and they do that. And there was none of that. Canopy was it was just clean, and there was no dirt anywhere. And I said, "Where are you going to get the dirt?" And they said, "It's out there. We've got a tractor coming to bring the dirt and just dump it in." And I said, "Well, wait a minute. What about the family being able to, participate in the burial and taking some dirt and no, we can't do that. That can't be done at all. That's just," and I said, "Well, I really want to do that. I mean, this is my friend. His wife is right out there. She ought to be able to do it, and she wants to." And they said, "Look, go back behind the barrier. And when the dirt gets here, we'll get a shovel and give it to you. And you come back. I mean, you come back and you can throw that dirt in there." So they did. And I was the only one that was able to do that. But I don't like that they are so, I don't know, it's almost antiseptic. You got to stay that far away. And
That's
I would say
what they want to do.
In secular cemeteries, they are far more accommodating to the family's wishes to be able to do that than the Catholic cemeteries are. And
That's right.
I find that simply a scandal.
And, well, I dealt in my parish with secular cemeteries, and that was a Freudian slip. But,
got a story about that too.
Yeah, and in fact, one that had a lot of Jewish burials in it, and so the staff is open to the fact that you might ask for a shovel to put the dirt in on it. Mm-hmm. But to go back to George's thing, the ritual actually, George, gives you a lot of options. So if your preference is to skip the emphasis on sin, you can do that. There's a way to do that in the ritual.
Okay.
Many of the prayers are A, B, C, so you can use either A, B, or C. And in Massachusetts, usually the family doesn't stay when the casket goes down. You can if you ask, but there is a law that a funeral director has to stay until the casket is actually down into the grave. Mm-hmm. So there was a very interesting professor at Harvard and a minister, kind of a flamboyant character of the church at Harvard Yard, the Memorial Church. His name was Peter Gomes. And Peter Gomes would always insist.
Right.
Peter Gomes would always insist when he did a funeral that the family stay until the casket was actually down in the grave. Mm-hmm. And in the Jewish burials, they do that, and they also take a shovel. And for some reason, traditional Jews apparently take the back of the shovel and throw a little dirt in, and then turn it over and throw a full shovel in. And someone said the back of the shovel is a special act of grieving. And then once you've done that, then you put in the burial. So there's a lot of variations on the theme that are possible in different places, different parts of the country, whatever. So, and you know, and to be fair, the Catholic ritual admits of the possibility of having those variations, even if you want, George, to have sneak in a little bit something like, let's hear it for sinners.
Sure, yeah. Since
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I guess I'm not against that. It's just that, to me, the timing, you know, there is a moment in the mass where people make their confession and they're sinners, but then you go on and then you're redeemed. And so to keep pushing the sin theme, so I'm glad to hear what you're saying, Frank.
Yeah. So the sin can be included, but not as thematic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sin, and wherever sin is included, you know, it really, in the funeral ritual as it is now, it is always redemptive.
Right.
It's not punitive.
Right.
What about, since we're talking about burials, what about here in California and other places, more and more, quote, green funerals?
Yes.
Where there's, you know, whole body burial, no undertaker. If there's an undertaker, they're actually specialized folk, and it's a much more low key. No embalming, and the body is simply placed in the ground naturally, you know, covered with whatever. And I'm kind of wondering when and if the Catholic ritual will allow for that. And then I'm thinking back, my gosh, pre-Vatican II, I went to one of those. I happened to be at a Trappist monastery, St. Joseph's Abbey, the Trappist monastery in Spencer, outside of Worcester, Massachusetts, on a retreat. And the tradition at the monastery is, if one of the monks dies while retreatants are present, the retreatants are invited to the service. And it was the most magnificent liturgy, including, you know, 24 hours with one of the monks always in attendance, and anyone there in the chapel prior to the burial. And then the burial was in the monastery cemetery, and it was, you know, simple hole in the ground. The dirt was there. When it came time to lower the body into the grave, the monks, literally with ropes, lowered the body. The cowl was pulled down over the face. One of the monks had a hatchet and went to a nearby pine tree, chopped off a couple of 3 branches, which were placed respectfully on top. It wasn't a 6-foot grave even, right on top. And then each of the monks, including all the retreatants, were handed the shovel, and everyone shoveled, and you continued to shovel away until it was completely buried.
And there was no coffin.
Pound the little mound and everything. I mean, it was like, it was an eye opener. So I went, oh my
And
God.
there was no coffin, right? The body was just enshrouded and placed in the grave.
Right, yeah, enshrouded in the habit of the Trappist.
Yeah.
There wasn't even a special wrapping or anything else. It was elegantly, beautifully simple.
Well, here
There's absolutely nothing in the Catholic funeral ritual that requires a casket.
Right. Or
Nothing that
embalming.
requires embalming. In fact, embalming is, you know, it's an unnatural act. You know, I'm sorry, Ned, but I was just appalled at the way George looked.
Oh, yeah.
It was just very clearly a shell with cosmetics on the outside and chemicals on the inside.
There was a very strong push by Susan and John not to have an open casket.
Yeah.
And I was in favor of that myself. He was a bag of bones, and they did try to dress him up, but it just
Try to
didn't.
fill him out. You could see a couple of stitches on the lips.
Yeah, it was
that sort of thing. That it was not a terribly good job.
no.
But the state laws of the state of California do not require embalming.
Right.
Nor in Massachusetts either,
Yeah. So you can have
unless you're going to have a viewing.
right.
In Massachusetts, if you're going to view the
If
body
you're
in
going
an
to
open
view, you
casket,
have to.
must
That's
be embalmed.
That's
And
California
those are-
too.
Yeah, those are public health ordinance kind of related things. Frank.
Yes.
And I don't know. I
Yes.
don't know how others feel about this trend that I think is going to be taking off more and more of composting, having your body
Mhm.
composted.
Yeah.
But there were some. I've read some statements of bishops or dioceses that very, very much oppose that and come to the point of, I don't know, forbidding it. Personally, I think that is for these days, that's probably one of the best and most reverent forms of burial that you could possibly imagine, because it does very intentionally what putting your body into the ground is supposed to do.
So
And-
could there be an amendment to Laudate Si, adding a
Oh,
paragraph?
who cares? Who cares? I don't care about Laudate Si and this. What I care about is diocesan policy. Because what composting does is actually does in a natural way and enhances what
Morning.
no, yeah,
Hey,
cremation.
Gary, I'm glad you're back.
Hi, Gary.
Hi, Gary.
Morning.
Gary, you're
That's
coming.
what
You're coming
cremation
in on
does.
a very enlightening piece of the events of the week.
Right.
Oh, so
Go ahead,
Maury.
Thomas. You were saying about composting us.
Yeah, what composting does is it essentially accelerates the natural process, and actually cremation and what do you call it, accelerates the natural process too, but it does so in a very ecologically wasteful way because of all the energy that's involved, and what could very well go into the ground and nurture plants goes up in the air and becomes pollution.
Ah, yes.
And it also takes longer like a young healthy man to cremate a young healthy man takes a lot more time than it does
And
to take
energy.
Yeah, right. Therefore energy. And I only had in 5 years in my parish here one green burial, and the woman was not embalmed. She was in a pine box, and she was buried in the ground without a cement liner.
Not in the Catholic cemetery?
And we were allowed to shovel dirt into the years ago. I was in Ireland, and all the burials were green.
Mm-hmm.
And they just put the casket down, and they had this black straw mat they put on top of the casket so that the stones wouldn't make that god awful sound when they went in.
Oh
Yeah.
Yeah. But every burial was done. I don't know how it is now. This was in the country in Ireland. So.
Well, not only was George's body in a casket, but they put the casket inside. Is this what you were talking about, Frank? Cement?
No,
Yeah. In some places it's called a liner.
With this
liner.
Huge,
to
heavy
keep the ground from sinking.
Yeah.
I'd never seen that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That is absolutely standard practice for Catholic
Is
cemeteries.
it something
And
about
the reason why is they don't want the ground to sink.
Right. It's standard practice in all cemeteries around here.
Yeah.
You don't have to have it, but if you don't, like the green burial, it's done in a separate section of the cemetery.
Uh-huh. And so are there some Catholic cemeteries that do have green green burials, like this person you were just describing a few minutes ago, Frank, was,
Yeah.
I suspect it wasn't a Catholic cemetery.
No, it was a secular cemetery.
Yeah.
And I rarely have ever gone to a Catholic cemetery around here, though we have some. But I've, you know,
It's
many years ago I was in one.
this
but-
is the tradition of so many Catholic churches in cahoots with the local mortuary and undertakers, and then also the contractors for, I mean,
Yeah.
it's all, yeah, it kickback all the way. I hate to
Yeah.
be cynical about
Yeah.
it, or do I?
Yeah,
No, I don't.
yeah, I remember when Paul came in, and Johnny Marino of Hugh Cannon's funeral home would come over to me every time and want no Paul because the family wants the flag. And this went on. Well, part of it was the family wasn't as hard over on the flag as Johnny was because he was too lazy to fold it, like like the custom requires that you fold it. So he came in to me one time, and he was relentless, and I was relentless. And finally, I said to him, Johnny, remember one thing: when you come through those doors, you're the undertaker, and I'm the funeral director. And I didn't get my $25 that Christmas.
$25. It used to be a bottle of good scotch.
Well, you could have bought 2 of them at that time for $25.
Really good scotch.
You know, it's
Yeah.
I don't understand.
Gary.
But the green burial at St. Vincent's, we have a cemetery, a Catholic cemetery that used to belong to the parish and now is the diocese runs it. But there's very many times when we've just lowered the casket into the grave. Is that what you mean by a green burial? Because
pretty much.
But George,
when I talk about green, Gary, I'm talking about how it's currently described, the write-ups, no casket, no embalming.
Oh, yeah, no.
It might be a simple, it might be a simple pine box. Matter of fact, there are a number of, there's one Trappist monastery in the Midwest that specializes in making very personal pine boxes, so you can make some very elegant ones that they'll custom make for you, but they're not as expensive as the funeral homes, but they're not cheap either. But that's what I mean, or none at all.
Well, as I say, normally my normal experience has always been, not always, but I mean, very often they've just lowered the casket into the grave. And Ned, when we had to move away and then watch all that stuff, I mean, it was like, that's the stuff that's what the cemetery workers do after the funeral, and everybody's gone. But I mean, we all stayed there forever.
It almost felt like an industrial event,
Yeah.
Big tractor comes in, dumps a whole bunch of dirt.
And that's exactly what the archdiocesan policy for funerals has made it, an industrial event.
Right.
With kind of holy trappings. Nonetheless, it's industrial.
It didn't have there was nothing spiritual about it at all. I mean, to me, it was just, we should have left.
Yeah, it would have been better for us to leave, I think.
There's actually an equipment company called Kubota that a lot of cemeteries use. They're small front end loaders and that, etc. So they move dirt around very easily. So many funerals are probably Kubota funerals.
It was a huge tractor. I mean, a huge lifter that came in with a big, huge. It had the top. I mean, this huge top, and then they put the top. They had to put the top on. They had to take off. Then they lower the casket, and then in comes the dump truck with all the. And they just raises thing and dumps the dirt. I mean, it was like it was. We sat there. I mean, it was cold, and everybody left. I didn't go over to the deal because I didn't know anybody, and until our classmate Ted Howard and Tom and said, "Oh, I'm going to go over." So then I went over to the reception, but it would have been better. The way I've always seen is when they lower the casket, everybody's there. If they want to throw dirt in, everybody throws the dirt in, you know, and then we go. And then the cemetery does its deal, you know. I'm gonna decline
I
that.
I just had the experience about 2 months ago of making my arrangements with a funeral director.
Oh, wow.
Which included purchasing a casket. So I had chosen a rather plain wooden one. I hate those cans that they use. And so my son convinced me that there was an Irish casket maker having a display, and that it was only a few $100s more, and that I should get that one. So I did. And it's called Lismore. And I've actually enjoyed some wonderful Irish whiskeys out of a Waterford crystal named Lismore. So I go forward with a happy memory. I'm going to spend eternity in a box, and hopefully they'll put some Waterford crystal in with me.
Hey! I have a scotch in my liquor cabinet called Lismore.
Yeah, it's a very common kind of name. Yeah,
it's your kind of basic everyman scotch like me.
Yeah,
Gary and Tom, why don't you guys give a little general sense of your experience of the Mass?
I'll tell you, for me,
Ned, that's a great suggestion.
Yeah, the Mass was lovely, and I think unfortunately I was able to hear all the speakers. You know, the Rosary and Vigil. I was sitting out. Tom and I were sitting together, and somehow the sound system I couldn't understand, because his son John and daughter Susan, and a young woman who was a lawyer, and I guess well, there were two lawyers.
Lawyers, yeah.
One was a young woman who George had influenced very much.
Yes.
From when she was very young, and I could barely understand most of those speakers. But then after the funeral, I think I love the music, and I was familiar with all the music, and Bishop Arms did a he gave a very, I thought he gave a good talk, and I could understand most of it. But when the speakers spoke from the side that you were on, those of you who saw the Rosary, the speakers spoke where the speakers spoke at the Rosary, they spoke also at the funeral. And from where I was sitting in the back on the altar, I could hear everything. And it was wonderful. I came away thinking to myself, it's amazing how George and you, Ned, have influenced so many people. I mean, in significant ways. I mean, you altered the course of their lives. And George did that. And this one person, Alberto, the guy who went to Yale,
yep,
who was he was terrific. And it was then that I thought to myself, here I went through the seminary. We all went through the seminary together. Then I took my odyssey and went to Northern California. And now we reconnect 50 years later, or whatever it is, to see what's happened with our lives in all that interim period. And I was just impressed with what's happened in your life and in George's life. Mm-hmm. And I thought to myself, how amazing how many people he influenced and he touched in a lot of ways. And I was just deeply impressed by it. And I think I mentioned this to you, or I mentioned it to somebody, maybe to Parker Sandoval, or maybe Tom, I said it to you. I guess when you go to East LA, there's a whole different culture, and it's a Chicano culture, and it influences people in a whole lot of different ways. I mean, our classmate, John Moretta, is an activist. I don't think Parker Sandoval was impressed with him as the LA Times was, but because
well, remember, he's vice chancellor. He has to deal with the fallout.
Yeah, John is very hard-headed. I mean, John could say this is the way it is, and that's it. I mean, there's no going. George, on the other hand, could argue with you, but in the most wonderful way. But I was just impressed with what with his what he did with his accomplishments. I came away. I've done a lot of thinking about it, and then also meeting our classmate Ted Howard, who's a Superior Court judge, and realizing how hard it is to become a lawyer. I mean, those of us who became priests took the easy way out. We got ordained. I mean, but we didn't have to pass the bar, and we didn't have to go through all the stuff that lawyers go through. And to be a lawyer and keep your, as you said, to keep your soul was an amazing. So I was very impressed with all of that. So that's my takeaway. So I don't know
Throw
about
mine in too, that the same thing, that it was very, very beautiful and very impressive to see his life and how he touched so many people in his life. What a beautiful gift that was, you know, to the world and to us to hear that.
He was a
Yeah.
Salesian for almost 10 years. And got, you know, just student after student after student would come up and just, you know, wax eloquent about how they would have been without, and how wonderful it is that they had George's influence. You know, lawyers and engineers and just a panoply of different professions that were on display there, those were guys that didn't have a whole lot of hope. One of the big things that they kept saying was, you guys raised our spirits up to the point where we thought we had options.
yes.
You know,
That's what I mean. I never realized in the East LA culture that for a lot of these guys, they just figured they're going to get arrested by the cops sooner or later. They're going to get a little 3-penny job, and that's about it. And George and yourself, Ned, remember that guy we were sitting at the table, and that guy came from St. Mary's. He said, "You changed our lives." I mean, George said, "It doesn't have to be this way." So I was just so.
and they're so demonstrative. I was sitting down and he bent over and just had his arms around me and behind me the whole time. You know, it was wonderful.
Yeah.
One of the
That was
things
fueled
that
by a
came
little
through in the,
cerveza too.
What?
I said that was fueled by a little cerveza also.
Oh, yeah, it's true. How red he was.
Yeah.
one of the things that I noticed that came through in the vigil, because I watched the whole vigil, was that George's son John,
yes,
appeared to be unconventional, if you will.
Oh yeah.
Very.
Yeah.
And his presentation, to some extent, was unconventional in terms of the setting of a Catholic funeral, but it was riddled with an appreciation of the life of the spirit.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which I found very, very interesting. And then the young woman lawyer,
Yes.
she was absolutely superb,
Yes.
because there was no extra words, but what she said was carefully presented, as a lawyer should, carefully presented, full of heart. It was just, I thought those two especially stood out for me at the vigil.
Yeah. Tom, what did you think?
Well, one of the reasons why I am so totally bummed that the live stream didn't happen and the recording wasn't made was that throughout all three of the eulogies, and they were so different, and Ned's was kind of the shining star in the middle, but there were just wonderful. Each reflection was so very different that I was saying, oh, I hope all the other guys are watching this and are listening to it or can listen to it, because it is so wonderful that I just let it all wash over me without paying any attention, particularly to details that I might have to describe later. So I you know, and the two others, who were they? Alberto and
Bob Kerr.
Bob Kerr. each one had their own just absolutely marvelous perspective, and you all harmonized with each other so very, very well. That, again, I'm bummed that we don't have a record of that for
Yeah.
for sharing.
We're
Yeah.
a little poorer for not having that there for us to view and remember. And I've got to say, if I did a good job, a huge debt of gratitude I have for Tom. I was calling him, what do you think about this, Tom? What do you think about that? And then my wife would chime in and say, well, what about this? And, it kind of wrote itself through the minds of Tom and my wife.
Yeah.
Ed was magnificent.
You say that, and yet, all that I did, you would pass things by me, and I would say, oh, that's perfect, Ned, don't change a thing.
Yeah.
Come back with something completely different, and I'd say, oh, that's perfect, Ned, don't change a thing.
Right.
And
And Ned, speaking for the rest of us, which is always a little dangerous, I really appreciated you being there for us in the weeks leading up to George's going home to God. And you were really present to him and to Betty and the family. You were in that role of a palliative and hospice chaplain just magnificently, from my observation and behind the scenes conversations with you as his leave taking was proceeding. Thank you for being there.
Well, thank you, Bob, for saying that. I thank you guys. I felt that I wasn't there enough. I didn't communicate with you guys, and that was my feeling. Because there were so many different phases to that whole process. I was Darlene and I went to Mass this morning, and on the way home, I was thinking, a couple of months ago, George and I were at a restaurant. George would come to our meetings, our Fratelli meetings, eating his cereal, the milk kind of splashing over. I mean, it was George. And then all of a sudden, just this precipitous decline. Doctor told us he would be around for 8, 12 months. And wow, I saw him on a Wednesday, and we were talking. He was thin. He'd lost, I don't know, 70 pounds with a bag of bones, but he was talking. He was lucid. The next day, he went into a sleep and never came out of it. And Friday, he passed. Just wow. So it would have been, anyway, enough.
Well, many times I think that dying people make these decisions to go when they want to go.
Yeah.
And there is a real difference between giving up and surrendering to the Lord.
Yeah.
And that could very well have been, what happened with George in terms of the precipitous decline.
Very, very.
Yeah.
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 And I'm glad all of us could be with him, that one day we got together, had Mass.
Oh, that was so
and gave communion and a blessing, and he blessed us. I thought that was awesome. That was
I referred to that in the eulogy. That was just, who else has a concelebration in his dining room, and on Zoom, the rest of the brothers are there, Oh my God, that was just precious.
It was, what a beautiful gift to him.
And he himself gave the heart of the homily.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, when he talked about wiping the tears from your eye, I mean, that just I've thought about a lot, and of course that was in the readings.
Yes,
that was in the readings. I loved when
chosen for that.
there was one of the lawyers said to George, I guess in the first law firm that George worked at, when George walked into his office and asked him a theological question, asked George, said, you know, how you did all your undergraduate work in the seminary. Why didn't you become a priest? And George says, well, I failed at obedience and chastity. And I failed all three. He left out poverty.
That was Bob Kerr, the professed atheist.
Yeah, it was a wonderful, you know, for me, that's the reason I came down here, was for that funeral. Although I combined it with a lot of, I've been driving all over California. I'm glad to stay here in the hotel today, that I'm going back tomorrow. But it was good to be a part of all of that. You know, so
yeah.
What happened? I don't. Him. I'm on an iPad, and one of you gets. I only shows 9 people, and then someone gets knocked off. Fred, right now I can't see, but that is Tim in this group, or could he not make it?
He couldn't make it. His wife had a medical appointment, and he had to take her to that. He turned his computer on so he could be tuned in, and he expected to get here. He said, you know, an hour into the program, so he might show up yet.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Because he's the one who instigated the mass.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, around his visit.
Yeah.
And John, you were
that moved me a great deal at the reception. As things were kind of winding down at the reception, Betty comes up to me and gives me this bag.
This is super.
And tells me that I forgot to take it when I was there the Wednesday before, and I didn't remember having been given it or whatever. But I didn't open it that time. I thanked her and hugged her and all of that at that moment. But when I opened it, here, with this icon of the resurrection, or the Anastasis, from the Kora church in Istanbul, which is one of my very favorite spots in all the world. That particular church, which is now reverted to a mosque, having been a mosque in the past. But this wonderful resurrection scene of Jesus raising up Adam and Eve, symbolizing the whole human race, which was also on George's card. But then on the back, it says in George's handwriting, to Tom from George, 2023.
Oh, wow.
That's cool. Oh, great.
Wow.
Yeah, we each got one.
You each got one.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
That
it's
I
a rough.
didn't realize, because I maybe it was because I left too soon.
Could have been. Yeah, they're sitting on the piano there next to the table.
Okay. No, I didn't realize that at all. Oh, but it was very special when Betty brought that to me.
Yes.
Sure.
I think you're all very familiar with my dedication to Mary, the undoer of knots, along with Pope Francis. But did she get woven in to the services?
No.
I had a piece of it of her in my eulogy, but I knew it was going to go way too long, and I could feel the stare of the bishop, behind me. I don't know. No, you didn't hear this, but I said, hey, I turned around and looked at him and said, I've cut out a whole bunch of stuff here in the need for time, and he sort of growled at me. But I had Mary the entire knots there.
Well, you were still shorter than the other two, and you were definitely a lot. You were shorter than the other two, and you were a lot shorter than his homily.
So,
And you know what? That's something. That guy Alberto was. What he said. Well, I've run out of time. I'm going to keep on going.
yeah.
Since I've already passed my time, I might as well keep on going.
So that was wonderful.
And
I was
funny.
I wish you'd have said what you were going to say. You were just magnificent. It was just a wonderful thing. Great tribute to George. You know, just a great tribute. So.
Well, here on the East Coast, I met I had lunch, Fred, at St. Mary's Hall on Thursday with a young Jesuit from California who was a student of mine at Loyola Marymount, Eric Berrietza, who's the new dean of what's the name of the school? Messina, that BC is starting, and two friends of his, priest from the Archdiocese, Juan Ochoa. Fred, Tom, do you know him? He's in liturgy, I think.
Yeah, he
I
is.
know him.
Yeah, I don't really know him, but he is. Yeah.
And Gilbert Guzman was a pastor also.
Yes.
So they were both here in Boston this past week. So it was nice to see a touch of LA here.
Yeah.
But you know, for me, it's been. I'll be glad to go home tomorrow because I have friends who died, George, and then the Bishop P.J. McGrath, and then a former principal of our high school who died all since Easter and all very quickly, you know, and with no anticipated anything. And two of them, Ed was from cancer, and George and PJ was he was on the cruise with us through the Panama Canal. And afterwards, he was a couple of weeks later. We got back. He was putting on his slippers. He was quite heavy set, and obviously not in the best of health. But he fell putting on his slippers and injured his back and had to go into the hospital. They did back surgery, and which was fine. Then he got pneumonia and passed away. So he couldn't. But to have three people like that so quickly, having now turned 80, I'm saying, my God, is this the order of the day? You know,
hang in there, Gary. Hang in
Yes, Gary. Stick around.
Hang in there, Gary. Yeah. You begin to think about, you know, how it can happen so quickly and so easily.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm looking at a coaster that someone gave me that is supposed to be a joke, but I think it's relevant here. It says, "Listen, I still want to be invited, but I'm not coming."
Well, yeah, I was at on the Feast of the Ascension, and I've used that. I was quoting how John Paul II, they said that the last word he said before he died was "Amen," and I think of the Ascension as the Amen to Jesus's earthly life. But I told the people, I said, you know, and then I heard said, I don't know if that's true. There was someone that said when Pope Benedict died, the last words he said was, "Jesus, I love you." And I said, it's got me to thinking, what would I say? What would be my last words? And I says, the only thing I could think of is, really?
Seriously?
Really? I thought, maybe.
Can you move that pillow a little bit?
Or you're standing on the damn tube.
What was Steve Jobs? Steve Jobs said something like, "Wow."
I have often thought that, you know, I would probably die in a car accident and my last words would be, "Oh shit."
Very appropriate.
All you can do is just live your life as best you can every day.
Yep.
And then,
That's it.
yeah.
With all the stumbles in between.
Yeah.
And trust in the Lord's love and mercy.
Yeah.
Yeah. George Ferrick sent out something. You read. I don't know about Henry Nouwen. George, what was that all about?
It was a couple of weeks ago. Tim Almy sent an email that had a link to Andrew Sullivan.
Yeah.
You know him, Gary, the columnist?
Yeah, I've been subscribing, but I think to that weekly dish, but somehow or other, I don't think I get it anymore.
Anyway,
it's
it was
really
a discussion.
Really good.
Yeah. His column was about how he doesn't like to be identified as queer, but he prefers gay, and he goes into great detail about it, which I thought was very, very interesting. So I came across this paper that started off. The title was "Queer Catholics." After reading Andrew Sullivan, I thought the title should have been "Gay Catholics," but it was "Queer Catholics," and it's written by an Australian fella who did his master's thesis in an Australian college on Henry Nouwen and homosexuality and the Catholic setting. And he goes back to Vatican II, and he goes back to the Dutch theologians, and he writes this paper. So I thought I'd send that to Tim, because I know Tim talked about visiting his son. Remember that
Yes.
Sandra encouraged him to go visit his son.
Yes.
And I think Tim felt kind of, ambiguous, ill at ease, or because he has a church's teaching and yet this is his son. And he talked about saying goodbye to his son. And I wrote Tim a message, because Tim said his son just told him how lonely he was.
Oh,
and I said, Tim, maybe next time you visit your son and he says something like that, you could say, gee, son, whatever his name is, I hope you can find someone.
Yeah.
I don't think Tim could say that, but I suggested that might be something he could think about saying. So anyway, I sent this article to Tim because I thought it might, I called Tim up yesterday and I told him about it, and he says, oh yeah, he's a fan of Henry Nouwen. And so I sent him the article and I copied all of you on it. So that's the background behind it. Because it turned out that Henry Nouwen was struggling with his own identity. And from what I gathered from the biographers, he was never in a gay relationship, but that he saw himself as gay or homosexual. But he felt that if he came out, it would really ruin his reputation, and his book sales would, plummet, and just all of his ministry might get, thrown away. So that's my sense of it. So, and I was a big fan of Henry Nouwen myself, The Wounded Healer and Generations Without Fathers and other books. I went to a graduation of a friend at Harvard, went to the Harvard bookstore to browse around and pulled out a book about Henry Nouwen. And I think the last thing he was working on before he died was he wanted to go to St. Petersburg to see the Rembrandt's The Prodigal Son, or the father, hugging the son. And I think that was a big theme of I think Jesus, the father hugging the son. And Nouwen was also a fan of the trapeze. I think he had the metaphors of death. He really became entranced with the circus and the trapeze. And I think he even did something on the trapeze himself, because I think he saw death as kind of going on the trapeze and then letting go, letting go to be caught at the other end. So anyway, that's the background behind the article there.
Oh, yeah.
Didn't Nouwen come out, shortly, a year or two before he died?
Really?
No, I don't recall him ever coming out. I don't recall that.
Yeah, I think he did, actually.
Did he? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, at the time of the funeral, since it wasn't available to us, George and I took a walk in a very beautiful park here in close to where I live in Kensington called Blake Gardens, a magnificent spot. And we were remembering and had part of this conversation. My piece of input into it was that the writer of whom he's speaking, actually the dissertation had another component, which was from the founder of the clinical pastoral education movement, Anton Boyson.
CPE.
And so that the reflection, his thesis is on Anton Boyson, who is the author of the term reading the living human document. And I do believe that the title of his thesis does in fact have the word queer and reading the living human document. What was the exact title, George?
I think you're right. Something about queer Catholics as living human documents, or
Yeah, I think
something like
that.
that. Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
That was the title.
Yeah.
Yes, it was.
My friend from when I was in Rome, I was befriended by a guy who was interested in Lonergan, who was a Trappist named Matthew Lamb.
Oh, yes.
When Matthew Lamb went to study, he followed Johann Baptist Metz from the place where he had been to Münster, and Münster is very close to Holland. And while he was a grad student in Münster, Henry Nouwen was his spiritual director.
Interesting.
I always remember he came to BC and gave a wonderful talk in which he had been in Latin America and he was saying goodbye to the people when he was leaving Latin America, and the people thanked him, and he realized he should be thanking them because their faith was so edifying. So I've always loved that story about Henry Nouwen.
Yeah, here's the
okay.
Here's the first page of the thesis.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've begun to read it also. I hope to finish it sometime.
Tom, you've given us access to that, I think, haven't you?
Yes.
I know I set aside the Sullivan piece.
George sent it, to everybody.
Oh.
Right. Yeah.
There's a little video clip of Henri Nouwen. Is it Nouwen or Nouwen? How would you pronounce it?
Nouwen. I heard him once say it's Nouwen as in now and then.
Yeah.
Okay, Nouwen.
In Netherlands.
Henry Nouwen. And he's and I'll send you the link to it because it's a little it's a sermon that he gave at some big gathering, and he talks about visiting someplace where a woman, Frank, you know what I'm referring to? Anyway, he talks about a woman that says, "Father, would you give me a blessing?" And he says, "Okay, I bless you in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit." And Ned, this reminds me of a conversation you shared with the group when you were ill and a priest came and did whatever was in the book, the rituals, and left you completely cold. And then you got somebody else to come in to fill in and do a more humane. But the woman said, no, Father, now give me a blessing. And then the woman went up and threw herself, hugging him. And then Nouwen put his arms around her and said, "You are so beautiful. You're just a wonderful person. God loves you." And whatever else he said. And the woman said, "Thank you," and went away. And then a whole bunch of people came up to get a blessing.
That's
So that was the idea of a blessing. He taught Andre now and what a blessing was, but it wasn't just the formula, but it was kind of pouring his heart out to this person. So it's very moving. I'll send you a link to it.
I actually, as a young priest, had an experience like that. I went to visit Mrs. O'Donovan, and she wasn't close to death, but she wasn't all that far away from it. And so I did the anointing and everything, and I blessed her and all of that. And then I sat down and talked with her, and she was Irish. So I asked her where she came from in Ireland. And she said she came from a place called Mitchellstown, which is near Cork City, from a place a good deal further south in the Panavan. My mother and father were married in the parish church in Castlehaven. And I thought she'd die right then. She got so excited. But as the conversation went on and I was getting ready to leave, she looked at me and went, and I said, "Oh, you want another blessing?" And she said, "No, a kiss."
Yeah.
How sweet. How sweet.
Yeah.
Well, it was sweet, but in addition to that, it taught me as a young priest that, the engagement with the human being is what makes the sacrament so real.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's thank you, Father, for coming to do that. The doctor came yesterday and took my blood.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Yeah, it reminds me of a joke, and I forget the joke, but I remember the punchline is the Irishman says to the priest, "Father, put your shacking heart into it."
If you actually do reflect on our sacramental theology, the primary symbol of all of the sacraments is the human encounter.
Right.
Embodies the divine.
Right.
So it's not like you put something of yourself into it. You can withhold something of yourself, but yourself has to be part of the sacramental sign itself.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. I
was a deacon in Liverpool for a summer, and the people didn't have phones. So they depended on you if you told them from month to month, and they were lonely, that you were coming to bring them communion. So my first foray, I went out, I had 10 visits, and I came back about 3 hours later. And the priest said to me, "Where were you?" I said, "Well, I was taking communion." He said, "Well, didn't you have only 10? I said, "Yeah." He said, "I do that in 45 minutes. But what I discovered was that the people, while they're devoted to the sacrament and have deep religious instincts, they also want you to stay and have a cup of tea with them.
Yeah.
And this notion of going in and ritualizing them.
Yeah.
You don't leave anything of a priest has to leave something of himself in the place where he goes to minister to people, or else it's just like going to the checkout line.
That's exactly the way.
And so I learned that very young.
Yeah.
George
At
was
the core of what this group is about.
Yeah.
Right.
George was a Eucharistic minister, and he spent half an hour at least with everybody that he would administer the Eucharist.
Right.
There's just absolutely no other way. And Tom, it's wonderful to hear that, at least I understood that there's something official that says that there's an encounter.
No, screw the official. Screw the official. You go into the theology of the sacrament, and if you read it if you read it and really reflect on it, whether it's St. Thomas or the ritual itself or whatever, you know, it becomes very clear it's the human encounter that embodies the presence of Jesus Christ.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, you know, and you can unfold that in all kinds of directions, but at the
Right.
heart of the sacramental sign, it's not just a thing that you say magic words over. It's rather an encounter, a human encounter with the, it's a human encounter with Christ, of which, you
Right.
know, we are mediators of by our human encounter with the Christian, or in the community, we are mediators of that human encounter with Christ. And then Christ is bringing the divine into that milieu. So,
Yeah,
That's what I love about it. I love doing it with people.
yeah.
That was
I
that
just
was a-
I just
that's
finished.
a favorite thought of Benedict XVI. Benedict XVI talked about the sacramental encounter a lot.
yes, he did.
Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of
Not
encounter,
recognized for it.
yeah, I just finished being the catechist for my 7th grade and 4th grade grandkids for this past year. And we use a wonderful series from Scholastic Press and the Jesuits out of Chicago called Finding God. And it's beautifully done from year to year. But I was kind of surprised, even shocked, on the section on sacraments, that the theology of Vatican II was conspicuously absent with regard to the definition of sacraments as encounters. We're back in the text, it was back once again to sign. Well, needless to say, Pepe Bob, Grandpa here, as their catechist just said, but let me tell you what's really behind this. And they responded much more to the notion of, I say, it's like what happens between us here, meeting one another week after week and redefine the sacrament sort of that way. And I went, and you're going to be, you know, running into people who are going to be using these words, and it's okay. You can use these words too, because it's part of the story. But what's the more important thing is this big word, this meeting, this encounter, this getting together, this what happens between us. And sometimes, and the bottom line in all of this, which I come back to, it says it's called love.
Yeah.
This is how the love is reflected and shared and going back and forth. But you know, I suspect in other aspects that it was really quite good, but it still had, you know, the no kidding. I was shocked to see it needed the Nicol Obstat and the imprimatur of the for the bishop in order to have it.
But you know, there's no contradiction between the encounter and the sign. You know, the encounter itself is the sign.
Right.
So that the old definition is perfectly valid. It is an outward sign instituted by Christ to give grace, but that sign is not, for example, bread and wine and the oil or the words or whatever. That sign actually is the encounter itself.
Right. So I used to talk like with children who come to confession. I'd have a little conversation about them, that there were 3 people meeting. And because most children, or I shouldn't say most, but many children have imaginary friends. So they know what it means to have someone important to themselves who they can't see or touch or whatever. But that doesn't mean that for them it's not that imaginary friend. We call it imaginary. They don't use that word, that friend isn't real. And if you build on that in a conversation with them, they kind of come alive and they begin to understand a little bit what's happening, rather than just, you know, them saying it, you know, it's an outward sign instituted by Christ to give grace. So I learned it from a Trappist in Spencer, by the way, who gave me, I think I mentioned this before, once gave me when I was grieving the loss of my wife, gave me as my next penance to convene a meeting between Janice and Christ and me.
Wow.
Wow.
Oh, wonderful.
Using your imagination, prayer, the Jesuit style of using your imagination in prayer. Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
It also strikes me that in presenting the Eucharist, each of you Eucharistic ministers represent the community. So there's a linkage with the community, not just you two.
Right. And remember always, the community is the body of Christ.
Yes, yes.
So it's not just happy clappy, kumbaya, we're all together. But it is, and this is what a lot of the critics of our Vatican II theology miss, that you are the members of the body of Christ. So Christ is there, really.
I still think our ecclesiology is undeveloped.
Oh, immensely.
We have not gotten really radical with what it means to be part of serving the body of Christ, rather than being served together within the body of Christ.
Right.
Yeah. Ned, what you're all talking about, I just remembered when I was in Ukiah one time, I had Eucharistic ministers to the sick, and one time one of them asked me, she said, so-and-so needs this, I think the sacrament of penance or whatever it was that she wanted, or maybe it was anointing. I don't know what it was. She wanted to be anointed. She wasn't close to death, but whatever it was, she said, I meet so-and-so at such and such a time. Can you join us? And I said, yes, I'll meet you at the time. And I drove to the house and we visited for a little bit. And then I did the sacramental thing that I was going to do. And of course, being, a very busy pastor, I had to get moving on. But I remember the woman who was the Eucharistic minister says, oh, Father, she says, you can go now if you like. She says, but I'll be spending a little bit more time here. And I think what I remember saying to myself, this is what real ministry is all about. We all have our own gifts. All of us have our own gifts. And I discovered that the Eucharistic ministers, as you said, they didn't just bring the host. They really spent time with the people. Mm-hmm. And, I remember a number of people one woman in particular told me about her Eucharistic minister. She said, she's simply an angel, So it all fits in, doesn't it? With everybody, the body of Christ, we all have our own little roles to play, within it.
Yeah. Yeah. In my eulogy, I spoke about the old man and George and the light that each one saw in the other.
Yes.
And the time they spent together, joking and laughing and talking about books and history, and all of that was sacramental. That was just a bond.
And that lawyer, what's his name, Bob Carr or whatever his name is?
Bob Carr, yeah.
Isn't he the one who said he described George's legal work as a ministry?
Yes, exactly.
This is a lawyer, and he said, I forget how he said it. I mean, how he was built up to it.
Well, Gary, when George decided to become, we both kind of decided at the same time. I went off to a national campaign, presidential campaign first, and he went right to law school. And he really took it to heart. And so he becomes a lawyer. He did extremely well in law school. He went to work for a very, 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 huge, renowned law firm. And he learned the craft from a man who was ruthless with him. just ruthless. He would spend 12, 14 hours a day in that office doing what this man wanted him to do. The baby lawyers have to do all of the research and, you know, be willing to take a lot of abuse from the partners who are just sitting there with the kind of tension and stress that they have and pouring it all into who they think are clerks, and they're new, very, very qualified lawyers. Anyway, the first, I don't know, 8 years of George's life was spent in this kind of atmosphere. And all his relational abilities seemed to fade. And he got himself into even personal issues. And then we met Father Herb Ryan. And Herbie just did a number on him. Herbie was brilliant. And from that point forward, he began to integrate, as Tom gave me that word, integrate his exceptional skills as a lawyer with the relational skills that he had practiced at Salesian. And that just flipped everything around. He had a happy lawyering life from that point forward. Amazing, just amazing.
But it was
Herb Ryan.
Herbie did that. Well, Jesus did that.
Yeah. But he does use human.
Absolutely. We use Herb.
That's
Herb
what we call sacraments.
Absolutely. Herb was. Go ahead, Frank.
Well, the whole thing about lawyering as ministering reminds me that Rolheiser says in his book Holy Longing that the incarnation is underappreciated.
Right. Yes.
That that it's an insight into reality that is extraordinarily powerful if we could only know how to sell it to a wider audience.
Yeah.
There you go. There you go.
Well, or if we only knew how to believe in it so that the wider audience could come to believe too.
Yes.
And see it in us.
Because, I'm not so sure the incarnation is underappreciated. I think it's ignored.
Well, that's maybe what he meant by saying it's underappreciated.
Yeah. I mean, we completely ignore the implications.
Right.
That's why I like Rolheiser and, of course, Richard Rohr so very much, because they are teasing out these implications of incarnation in ways that, I never thought of that.
Who was this Herb? He was a priest of.
Herb was a Jesuit. He was brilliant. Fred, you and Herb would have gotten along just beautifully, and nobody would have understood what you were talking about.
Well, Herb was very active in the ecumenical scene.
Yes, and he had been designated to be an integral part of the relationship between the Catholic Church and the Anglican Church. And he had
the RSIC conversations.
Pardon?
The Anglican Roman Catholic International Commission.
Yes.
I know of him from having done some research behind the scenes on RSIC. Yeah.
He was ready, and then, well, this is a little bit of a diversion here, but for some reason he had some kind of spiritual awakening or diversion, and he had to withdraw from that mission. And he met with JP2 at one point to talk about it, and JP2 was just livid with Herb. He pounded on the table. He said, "Pounded, you have duty. You have duty."
Oh, wow.
and Herb said, I cannot do that. I will not do that. And the Pope got up and left, just walked out in anger. And then Herb came to Loyola Marymount and gathered just a huge group of students around him. One of them, who wanted to get into politics, was a friend of Zeman, and Bishop Zeman. And Zeman and I had lunch, and we were celebrating I got promoted where I was, had a bunch of lawyers reporting to me, and Pat had just been told that he was going to be an auxiliary bishop. And so we had lunch together and talked, and he asked me whether I might talk with this lawyer that was a very close friend of Father Herb's, and I did. And then he said, can I bring a priest friend to your house for a barbecue or something? And I said, yeah, sure. So I invited George, and at our home, Herb walked in and with Bonnie. His name was Bonifacio Garcia, a Harvard lawyer. They walked in, and George and Betty were there, and the mix began to happen. And George asked Herb a question. He said, Father, as George would, and bring it, listen to this. He said, Father Herb, you know, in the setting, we were all sort of gathered around in our living room. And he said, Father Herb, this bothers me a lot. Let's say that you are talking with a Jewish rabbi, and you're in Germany, and the Holocaust is happening, and the rabbi is in hiding. And the rabbi comes to you and says, Father Herb, I'm so afraid, because I am going to be found, and I am going to be taken, and I will be killed. Herb, what would you say to this man? And Herb looked at him, you know, and said, here's what I'd say. I'd say, oh, what does that mean about God? Says the rabbi to him. And Herb said, I don't know what it says about God at the moment, but here's what I would do. When they came to get you, I would go with you, and I would hold your hand all the way. Wow. And that impressed George no end. And that's where the relationship started. And Herb, well, he's told us in this forum here that we have that he had a 2.5, 3 hour walk in the night in a parking lot with Herb Ryan. And at the end of it, George said, Father, I want to come back to the church. I want to go to confession. And Herbie looked at him and he said, what do you think you've been doing for the last 3 hours? I'll give you absolution.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the kind of guy Herbie was.
When Ned talked about the fact that Herb and I could have a conversation which none of you guys could understand.
I'm kidding.
Oh, I know. But one time, I think it was when we were at St. John's, that middle place before I went to Rome.
The seminary college, yeah.
Yeah. One of my classmates came up to me and gave me remember Mad Magazine?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
They had a tip off on Ripley's Believe It or Not.
Yeah.
And he had cut out of the Mad Magazine this little thing about Ripley's Believe It or Not. And it said, Zane Sturdley, who spoke 17 different languages, and none of them could be understood by anyone.
That's like Jack O'Hare was, my first pastor was talking about a priest in our diocese. He says Aurelio speaks 5 different languages and he's totally unintelligible in all of them.
Gift of tongues.
Oh, me.
Oh. The next time when we get together, I want to, apropos of what George, when I asked you about that, what Nolan said, at PJ McGrath's funeral, I was talking to Bob McElroy, and I told him how I really appreciated the things that he was writing about, morality and that lack of poverty of matter and all that kind of stuff. And he said a lot of the bishops, in Europe agree with him. But we could talk about that another time, though. But I was, they may be sowing the seeds of a lot of change.
Oh yeah, you might want to send him that, that paper.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, forward it to him. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Wow.
Well,
it's 12:08.
Ned,
It was nice though.
Time
It was
flies.
very nice.
Yep, thank you.
Amazing, as usual, conversation.
I'm sending to all of you right now a link to archive.org, the Internet Archive, that has on it an extensive collection of Mad Magazine. Issues of Mad Magazine. In case you want to take a trip down memory lane.
Oh, that'd be great.
Remember Mad Magazine used to do a take-up. It was called "Believe It or Else."
Yes.
Right.
Right, which is a good opening for your Trinity Sunday homily.
It is. And so Ned, are you going to sing us off with?
No. Let's pray.
Maybe just a verse or two of Pescadero.
What about this? Praise God from whom all blessings flow. Praise creatures here below. Praise Him above every host. Praise God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Amen.
Lovely.
Beautiful.
Thank you very much.
Here, guys.
Till
Yeah,
next
we're certainly,
time.
we're certainly not a group of nuns. We would have done much better with that.
Good, George.
God bless.
Farewell. Blessings. Bye-bye.
Well.